Hi, today I want to show you how you can integrate every SDK in Wized and Webflow. This is a little live build where we're going to go step by step through the whole process of integrating every SDK in Wized and Webflow because it always follows the same or similar principles. So we're going to go step by step through everything, and we're going to use ChatGPT to figure some things out. We're going to use their documentation. We're going to look at their documentation together and figure out how we can piece those pre-built bytes of software to then make it work with our Wized setup and to make it work natively within Wized and update the variables immediately as an interaction happens on the SDK canvas. So let's get started right with that. So let me just open really quick my Webflow project. So the first step, as always, is you have to connect your Webflow project with your Wized project, of course. And once that is connected, we can just basically start with the fun part here. So in this example for today's video, or today's live stream actually, hello, it's live, we're going to use Tiny MCE as an example. So one thing you need to know is most of those documentations actually will give you multiple options. They will tell you like Angular, Vue.js, React, or HTML or JavaScript. And then you have like WordPress, you have web components, well, jQuery may be interesting. But you mainly need JavaScript or vanilla JavaScript. Sometimes they call it so nice vanilla JavaScript. It's just basically another word for plain JavaScript. That's what we want here. So, because I never worked with Tiny, so let's just actually look at their documentation together to figure out how this thing works. This is my API key, apparently, and they're going to give us a setup like this. Tiny comments, author, interesting. So let's actually look at some of their examples. Let's actually go to the dashboard here, and they have the React thing, they have the JavaScript thing. I can copy that, and let's see, they have some plugin options available, and get content API method. So to retrieve content from TinyMCE, either process the content with a form handler or use the get content API method. Okay, so I always like to look at how I'm getting out of that, what I'm doing with this API before I start anything, because setting up that API is one thing, or setting up that SDK is one thing. Now, setting it up the way that I can get actually the content that I put in it outside of it and to use that in Wiz is a different thing. So I always basically like to look first for the escape, the exit out of that room, if you want it basically that way, how I'm going to get the data out of this SDK before I actually start working with the SDK. So it looks like they have the get content, they have this tinymce.activeEditor.get content, and then my text area, where you can get the content out of that editor, which is basically what we need because we have to send that content probably somewhere or interact with that in Wized. So, but now actually let's get started. So the way they work is they're going to give us this library here where we can download all their code without writing any code into the header of our page. Perfect. Then they're going to, because this code is, they wrote this code so generically, we need to do some little JavaScript to, first of all, initialize the Tiny editor. We're going to initialize that on the text area, which will be probably an element which we're going to give an ID. We're going to load some of their plugins that are defined in this library. Then we're going to enable certain features inside their toolbar. And then we're going to have a comments mode, probably. We're going to have an author name, which we probably are able to set or set it dynamically. And then we have a merge tags list with some parameters like title, email, and all of that. Interesting. And then we have AI request, and it's probably something you can integrate with an AI assistant, but we're not going to do this in this video today. But yeah, and then we have the HTML here. It's giving us, it's ending the script. It's starting the text area, which is HTML, and just say welcome to TinyMCE, and then we can do that ourselves. We probably need to add an ID to the text area because it can, so that it can detect that. But yeah, let's look into that. And actually, that is my first question to ChatGPT is, how does this JS code identify the text area? Because if we go back to their code, we see this text area, but that's like just the HTML tag of the text area, but there is no ID saying this is text area. But then they say here, selector, text area. So it's probably looking for all text areas on the page, which we don't want. Or not, in this example at least, not everybody would like. So let's look into that. ChatGPT is telling us the selector option with the tiny .init configuration tells TinyMCE to apply the rich text editor functionalities to any HTML element that matches. Okay, we don't want that. I only want this to apply to elements with the ID. And sorry if I do typos. I cannot see what I'm typing here because of the video recorder bar here. Elements with the ID of tiny. So I want them to give the ID tiny, and then I want to only apply this TinyMCE on the element that has the ID of tiny, because we don't want this SDK to be initialized everywhere. So now this is what ChatGPT is going to update for us. So we're going to do a selector and the pound tiny. So we're going to look for ID. That's how you look for an ID in HTML. And then we're just going to proceed with the same setup. And it's probably just going to add like ID equals inside our HTML. And now we can copy that code. We probably need to update the key because ChatGPT sometimes updates or actually, it ends with IB. Okay, actually, it kept my API key as it is, so we can use it directly like this. And now the first thing I like to do is, let's go to Webflow and let's add an HTML embed. And let's just, we don't have it stay like this. We're going to move it to Wized, and we're going to do some exciting stuff with it. But let's just add this code in here, how ChatGPT gives us, and let's try to make this work statically in Webflow HTML embed. Now, once we got this working in an embed, we know that it works, and it's easier to then make this work in Wized as well. So we got that whole thing working. We got our editor, and I can use AI. I can do like hello. It's not going to work. Yeah, we need to implement that feature. So maybe the first thing we tweak around is removing this AI thing from our code and seeing if it still works. So this is how I like to play with SDKs. Let's keep it as code, and let's try to a little bit tweak around with that, so that when we then turn this into actually something we use in Wized, we already have it bite-sized. So failed to initialize plugin AI. Perfect. Now we need to remove the plugin of AI. And we got some plugins in here. So we have AI. Perfect. Let's remove AI from the plugins. And let's see if that successfully removed the AI plugin. So this is with the nice thing of well-documented SDKs. It's easy to fix things, and we can type in here, and we got this whole editor going on. We can add photos. We can add videos just like that. We can embed things like it's a great thing. We can add comments. We can do like, oh, we cannot. We have to do that setup. But we can add like an email and all of those things. Actually, I can add comments now. I can do like hello. I can comment hello. I can like, this is great. Perfect. So we're not going to play with all the functionalities of the SDK today, but just so that you know that they are, we have an accessibility checker, no issues detected. We have typography has been enhanced. So we got all those great features in here. We can do this heading 1. So we got all those great features in here. We can insert templates. So this is really an extensive SDK, and it's great. Now, we want to make this work dynamically, because when we have this editor, more than likely, let's say we build the next send grid and we want to send this email out in Wized, we need to get this data that we type in here working in Wized. So that, because right now, if I go to Wized and I type things in here and I interact and I make them look as nice as I can, let's style this in here and so on, Wized doesn't know what's going on with the SDK. The SDK is a piece like this and Wized is like this, and they just don't match, they just don't connect, they just don't communicate together. Right now, the SDK and Wized are two separate entities. They don't work together, they don't work in harmony, they don't share a common environment they're working within, because we have that as an HTML in Webflow, and we're not going to use Wized JavaScript API. Now, we're not going to use the JavaScript API here, we're going to make it easier for ourselves. I'm going to take this JavaScript code here, and I'll just simply move this to Wized. So let's just cut out the JavaScript code from this HTML embed so that we can work with it in Wized. And now we see we have this text field. The SDK is not initialized, but now let's actually add an action in Wized, and let's call this a tiny MCE, just like that. And I'm going to add an event-based action, and we want to do this after the page finishes loading, so that we don't want to start the SDK to initialize everything before this component has been loaded. That could cause some issues. So I'm going to paste that, and we need to remove the script tags, those ones, because they are not needed if we run this in Wized. And then we're going to use this button right down here just to prettify that. And now we see it just fired off, and we have it working in Wized now. And this was now initialized in Wized. But of course, now Wized is actually, and we can work with Wized cloak here to remove this little box once it gets initialized. But now the magic that happens since we got this in Wized is all those settings that we can do in here become now to us accessible within Wized. Now they're not accessible out of the box. We have to do some configurations as with every SDK, but it gets closer here. So let's actually go to a little code snippet I prepared, and I want to add 2 functions basically. This part, I'm going to copy this part, and I'm going to walk you through that. And what I want to do is I have this code here to initialize the tiny MCE, but I want to do one more thing. I want to add 2 functions, and I may edit that at the wrong space. So let's do this here. Perfect. And we may need to define it, but the idea is we want to create a variable, and we want to add an event listener on change and on input that will then run the function of equaling editor content as the get.content operation, which was defined in their documents, and then set this as the variable that will show us our input. Now this is the idea, but we're still going to do this together. So no worries here, and we're going to use ChatGPT, but I just wanted to warn you, we're going to use event listeners here. So I want to take my tiny MCE code right now, And let's go to ChatGPT. That's the easiest way to get the job done. And let's create a new chat. And let's say I have this tiny MCE and I want to listen and log the events of input and change. So what we're telling ChatGPT is every time I type something in or something changes, I want to log that. And I want to log the events. Actually, I want to log the input. So I want to listen and log the events of input and change. Actually, I want to log the content. So I want to listen to the events of input and change and log the updated content in the tiny MCE using console log. Now I'm going to say console log because it is easier for us to turn the console log now into updating a Wized variable than just having ChatGPT do like 50 lines of updating a variable with the most complex ways of doing so. So we're just going to do a console log using console log. Thanks. We always gotta be nice to the robots. So ChatGPT is going to work on that now. And it's giving us now basically probably 2 event listeners, one for on change, on input, and then giving us a little function that will just like .get content with this function that TinyMCE provides us. And yeah, it is. We don't need to really listen to that part. It is just giving us a generic setup here. Maybe even let's add context to this. Let's say perfect. Can you please make this principle work with this code that I'm using? That I'm using. Perfect. So now we're just going to wait till ChatGPT customizes our code. We can just copy and paste that and work with that with low effort. And we all love low effort. So wonderful. It's going to give us all those configurations. And then we don't have any typos in there as well because ChatGPT is doing that. So we're going to create the setup. We're going to call this basically editor, and then we're going to listen on this editor. So this setup we're going to define here. We're going to basically call this editor, and then every time something happens to the editor, we want to add the event listener of input, and then we're going to console log that an input was detected, and we're going to console log the input as well, and then that is within the tiny MCE, and then we're going to do the same thing here for if a change happens. Now let's copy this code and let's customize this together. So let's add this code in Wized, and we can keep that set up. We just may want to remove that comment. But now in the setup here, let's change this a bit. So let's remove the first console log of both because we don't want to log basically that it just detected something. And now let's actually go one step back and let's create a new Wized variable. Let's call this tiny input. Just like that, we have a tiny input, and I'm just going to have this equal an empty string, just like that. Wonderful. And now I'm just going to go in this code, and let's just basically go in here. Let's give this a little bit of space so we can easier understand what we're doing here. Perfect. So right now we're going to console log the content that is contained in this text field right here in the tiny MCE when an input happens, right? We're going to take the content and log it. Now we don't want to log that content, so I'm removing the console log and the outer brace because we just want to have this equal our variable of v.tiny_input. So I'm going to simply add our variable and then have like equals editor.getContent function. And it will then, whenever an input happens in the TinyMCE, I type something in, it will then detect, oh, an input happened, it will run this function, and it will then have this variable that I have right here, the one right here, this variable, equal the current content, the current HTML formatted content that is inside this TinyMCE editor SDK. Now, we want to basically just copy the whole line and do the same thing under the different condition on change. And you may ask yourself, why are we doing on input and on change? Now, let's actually give you a practical example here. Because not every change is an input. And I'm going to show you why we're going to use on input and on change. Because if I'm going to refresh this, and let's make sure that works. So if I'm going to type something in, you see that we're going to update the text, right? But if I type Wized and then make it bold, now the HTML changed, but it's still showing us the old HTML. It's not detecting that we changed it to bold. Only if let's add now a dot, we have the strong tag for the bold, which was actually initially added. So it's only detecting those if I start typing on input, but not if something changes. So now that's why we have to add on change in this example. So let's add on change again. Now the other question is, why do we need to use on input? Can't we just use on change? Now let's try this out. I love experiments, you know that. So let's go to the variable. Now if I start typing, it's not updating it initially or immediately, it's only updating it if I, for example, change the style or move out of the window. So if I type something here and do next line, it's saving that. But it's not saving it if I write something on one line. So let's actually save this. And if I were to do like this, of course I don't want to save that, but it wouldn't save that. It wouldn't update the variable while I'm doing this. But I want that because it's an input field and it's supposed to be immediate. But the moment, for example, now I focus text, then it's updating that. So it's not efficient, or it's not immediate enough experience for our requirements. So we need to add two event listeners on input and on event, because then we get then we get the best of both worlds. Now, if I start removing that, I will be console logging that I removed the exclamation mark. And now if I do it bold, I'd be logging that as well. So whatever I do, really, it's going to update that variable immediately, just like that. Now we can even go one step further. So this is the core functionality. Maybe we want to pre-populate, though, our TinyMCE with some dynamic content in a variable. And to do that, let's just call this template and let's just keep it as it is. So let's actually try adding some dynamic content in here as our template content. Now, one way we could do that is we could just, and this is probably the way I'll be doing that, we're just going to have an empty TinyMCE, and we're going to use their SDK to load some content in there after a request finished. Because if you now try to take this and use dynamic content coming from your database, you may have some timing issues then if you would try to initialize the TinyMCE before your content already made its way to Wized. So that way we're just going to add the function to manipulate the content from empty content so that then you can base this action after whatever request you want to do finishes, to not have any timing issues and to always to display the content that's supposed to be in there. So to do that, let's actually go back to Webflow and let's actually clean up some things here. First of all, let's do a good job here and let's add this to the header of the page. Now they tell us to add it to the header on the page, so don't say anything that I added this to the header. I read their documentation a little bit before. Now we basically just need to add a text area and we can set text in there. So let's actually remove this HTML element because we don't need that anymore. Our testing phase is over. And let's add, no embed, that was the wrong element. Let's add the custom element in Webflow. So I'm going to add the custom element just like that. And it's a text area, just like that. Wonderful. Now I'm going to add my ID of tiny. ID tiny, just like that. And now I could add some pre-text in here, but we don't need that since we want to render that text dynamically. And now I could even do Wized cloak. So let's do Wized cloak. And let's add the Wized cloak code in here. And I hope that I still get that together. So actually, yeah, I think that's it. So we're going to write Wized cloak and then something like this. Actually, I'm not completely sure, even though I use it all the time, how to write that, because I just copy and paste that. So let's go to my Webflow account and figure out how to do Wized cloak again. So let's go to Wized loader and let's copy the Wized cloak code. I don't know out of the top of my head. Let's go in here and yeah, it's always the easy things that you can remember, isn't it? Now I'm going to add the cloak part in here. Perfect. And you can also use Wized loader for that, but now we have Wized cloak applied to that. So here we go. Wonderful. And now if we see, we will not see, oh, we are seeing it though. So let's make sure everything published. Now we shouldn't see this element. So let's double check. Wized cloak. Let's try adding that before we initialize it. We have Wized cloak, or it may not work because of the way the SDK is built. That could be. Actually, let's try writing true. I had that sometimes, that Wized cloak didn't work unless I write a value in it for the custom component. So let's see. No, maybe it's something the way the SDK works that is a little bit messing around with, because it's also not initializing that right now. So let's try a different approach. Let's don't use Wized cloak for this. And let's then just work with CSS classes later on to touch those things a little bit up. But we have the text area. We have the idea of tiny, so that thing should work right now. And let's see how we can get this work now. Now it's not initializing that. Interesting. But we still have all this configuration code, and we look for the ID of tiny. So I assume that maybe because we use the custom attribute, it's not really linking up with the ID anymore. So let's try a different approach here. Let's look for the custom element of ID equals tiny, and I need to do other quotes. Let's do those ones like this. Let's see if that works. Interesting. So have the ID of tiny. It's just not working. Maybe I need to add text in here for it to get recognized. Let's see. No. Interesting. But that code is working? So then, in this example, in case it won't really work, or maybe another thing before I'm going to go a step back is let's move that code, even though they say in their documentation header, let's move that code to the body. But it worked before, so I don't see, but let's try it. Because it was as an HTML embed, and that was the thing that changed. No, that didn't work. Or let's try again. No. Okay, so this is, and let me know in the comments if you found my error, but we're just going to use an HTML embed for this. So, perfect. We're going to do it like this. Then we're just going to work with the code for this SDK. Yeah, it's something strange about it. We have the text area, we have the ID. Let me know if you know why it didn't work for me. Because if I were to split this up, and now it's personal between me and TinyMCE, if I were to split this up and turn this into a different, let's try this. If I were to turn this into a different component, it would work, right? So, let's see, if I were to turn it into a different component, it will work. So now, if I take the custom element, which is not so custom, I'm going to copy text area, and I'm going to have this as a text area, and I'm going to take the ID, and I'm going to call this tiny, and let's just make sure to copy and paste that so there are no typos, just like that, and let's paste that in here, boom, and let's add the same text, just like this. And those are brothers now. They're the same. And now let's see which one works. Okay, both work. So it probably must have been me doing a typo. Okay. That's development. Let's save this now. Let's remove the big brother. And it's working. Now, let's see. This is how we're going to do problem diagnosis. Let's remove this HTML embed because I think it may be the script, potentially. And let's put this, let's remove this one. Let's put this in the header only, as their documentation refers to. And let's save this. And let's see if that works. Let's see. It does. Wonderful. So, I think potentially it could be the Wized cloak issue. Potentially. Because if we add Wized cloak on there and we set visibility to none on the page, that element doesn't exist on the page. That's it. If we add Wized cloak on this SDK element, this visibility wouldn't exist of that element. For some reason, it still got initialized. Because maybe it started touching it, and that's why Wized then just did something with it. I'm not completely sure. Alex probably can help me with that in the comments, but I'm thinking that when we add display none, it doesn't live on the page necessarily. It just doesn't in there. It's not just in there. So then maybe Tiny had an issue grabbing that element and modifying and manipulating that. So in order to avoid that, let's actually call this Tiny, and we're going to do that setup later. But now we want to add dynamic text. So let's remove the text and let's reload that and see. Well, yeah, we get it without text. Now we just want to go to our actions, and I want to do an action for set content, and I want to do in a event-based action, it probably does page finishes loading, but I have to refine that. If you get that content dynamically, you want to do page a request has finished. But now I want to go run function, and let's go into their documentation and let's see how we're going to set content in this thing. So let's go to the tiny MCE docs and let's do set content. Perfect, that's even how that thing is called. So set content, and perfect. Let's copy this and let's go to Wized and let's see how we can make that work. So we have tinymce.activeEditor.selection.select content. Okay, let's see what ChatGPT gives us based on the contexts. How would I add content into this after it was already initialized? Let's see. And ChatGPT will maybe give us a different approach. Let's see. It will still give us set content, and it will be using their API. So we have tinymce.get tiny, and we do set content. This is the new content. Let's see if that works. Perfect. Let's add this function. So we have this request. This is the new content. And it's showing up in here. Wonderful. So the moment I run this request, because we have a timing issue now, this has been. So we may want to use like a state variable, or a status variable. Let's do tiny status. Because I'm thinking of, okay, now we initialize tiny first, but we only want to add content after tiny has been initialized, right? And then maybe even only after the request has finished, if we do anything dynamically here. So, but in our example, we have this timing issue that when I load tiny, we set content in here, but due to it's taking a bit longer, and both happens on page load, we have an issue that content isn't set in here. So let's add a status, and let's add the initial status to loading. And then we're going to go to our tiny MCE function, and at the end, so meaning after all of that finished, you can go even more precise and say with this, go into the element and see if something was rendered, but I'll just do it very minimalist here, equals finished. Let's do finished like this, finished. Perfect. So, as we can see, when now tiny is loading, it will be loading, and once it has finished, it will be finished. Now we can go to our request to set the content in here and change it to custom condition, and we can simply do return tiny status equals finished. And once it equals finished, we will see the content in here. Now if I reload that, it should dynamically set the content in here, but still not. So I think we still have a timing issue, because it will work like this. So we may even need to look for the status. So we potentially even need to do the thing that I didn't want it to do. So let's go to ChatGPT and let's say, how could I run this simple function if the tiny MCE has successfully been initialized? And again, I can't see what I'm typing here because the application for recording this video is over exactly the spot where I have to type, so sorry for any typos. So we can use the callback function, And ChatGPT will now give us a great idea how to implement that. Because we then want to set the content in it after it has initialized or finished loading. Now, of course, you could just manipulate this text area here using Wized, basically. And that would probably be a way easier way of doing that. But it would have the downside of some of the API functions you could work with. Now, if you just manipulate it within, you may not have that nice fade-in animations that Tiny will give you. You may not, you may not have that great of a user experience if you just manipulate the DOM directly from Wized without having to go through the SDK. There may be some limitations then, and maybe some features that are not going as smooth as you should. So we want to do like really a best practice approach here in working with their SDK. So we do this init instance callback, and yeah, that seems to be working. So we would do this right under the function to set that up. So let's copy this, and let's basically add this now right under here. They put it under the function. Let's add that in here. Perfect. So we have init instance callback. We do a function. We can, let's just keep that, and then let's remove this comment. And let's see if that works. So if I reload this now, we see that it's now not working. So let's see what's going on. So we have the tiny MCE, and we have the function. Callback. Let's see. Setup. I think we do this thing with the function editor twice. That may be the issue. Let's add ChatGPT. I added this to my code, but it's now not showing the editor at all. Let's see what ChatGPT comes up with and how we can fix that. So it looks like the issue causing a tiny MCE editor not to display might be due to the syntax error. Of course, ChatGPT is great at finding my syntax errors. Because the comma, of course, it's always a comma. It's always, the robots will beat us in adding commas in the appropriate places. So it was a comma. Here you go. But this is why ChatGPT is so great, because it will help you. Actually, that's exactly, I think, where the comma is wrong. But we have a comma. And now it's working. It was a comma. Look at that. And now if I reload this, we will see that it will render the content directly in it. Isn't that great? Now, again, you could also just add a Wized attribute to this text field and then manipulate the content in here. But you may have some reactivity issues with that, since you're not going to use the SDK directly within Wized, rather than just trying to manipulate the DOM. But this is basically how you're going to set the tiny MCE. Now, with Wized Cloak, how we're going to do that, let's do another little thing of adding that. Let's add this tiny MCE, and let's add a combo class of is hidden, just like that. Now, because we couldn't really get Wized Cloak to work, but I still don't like the way it's fading in, so let's just do an alternative. We do is hidden, and now on the is hidden class, I want to have opacity 0. Now, if I remove the class, I want to add a transition of all properties, and let's do like 500 milliseconds. So now if I have this hidden, and once this gets initialized, we will have that editor fade in. Now, in order to do that, I need to apply a Wized attribute on this element. So let's do Wized, and let's do text input. So we have this text input, and we're going to use the set class action in Wized to now have that SDK fade in. So Let's go to Wized and let's refresh that. And the nice thing about Wized is now, if I reload, it's already refreshing the attributes, as you can see, which is a super powerful feature. So now I have this text input, and actually it may not work because it seems like it's hiding this element for some reason and then rendering the tiny MCE over it. But let's see. Let's try actually set visibility. Let's do return false. Or actually, let's do, yeah, it should be false. It's hiding that element. It's not hiding the tiny MCE. So actually, that will not work because the SDK is rendered above that input field for some reason. So let's do something else we could do would then be basically having this fade in. Because I still want to get that fade in animation. I think that would look way nicer than just having this like this. So let's actually work on the fade in part first, and then let's see how we can fix that flashing element. So let's ask ChatGPT, how can I have this tiny MCE gradually fade in once it successfully once it got successfully initialized. Perfect. So let's see how we're going to have ChatGPT do that for us. We're going to do a CSS fade in animation, CSS for fade in effect. We have fade in visible. It's going to give us some CSS. So let's add that on the header of the page. Let's add some style tags. And we're going to do style. Just like that. We're going to add our CSS animation. Now let's go back and let's see. It gave us the initial class of fade in on the ID of tiny. Oh, actually, that's what we already did, but yep, let's just add that class anyway. We have a custom element, so we can do that. Let's go to Webflow. Let's save this. And let's go to the tiny, and let's add the class of fade in, just like that. Here you go. Perfect. So we have that working now. And now let's do this get element by or through. Oh yeah, we don't need to do that. So now it will give us the modify the init instance callback. So we will have that fade in, probably then dependent on when it finished or on whatever they used to identify. So here is the full code, and they will just add like the fade in animation in here. Fade in visible. Okay, perfect. So it will start opacity 0 and then move its way up using a fade in transition. So let's copy this, or actually let's select this, paste it out, and let's see if we get a fade in animation. It's not really a fade in animation. That may be though due to the way it is rendered in this block basically. So I want to try still again adding a fade in on top of this element. So we have the transition in here, and we have the combo class for is hidden. So let's, yeah, perfect. So we have this element, and then we have is hidden. I want to have the start at is hidden. Let's see what happens. So right in here, if we have the start at is hidden, we will see we have no content flashing because it will override that anyway. So what I want to do now is let's modify the width of this. Let's add a width of 100%, or maybe let's do 70%. because it has like the thing where it does this thing. So let's do 70% and let's do 35%. Or we have to do probably 25 rem or something. Okay, so let's have this element actually equal a size that is probably a bit bigger, but still relevant for this tiny MCE. And I mean, it starts nice. So let's look into that. If I remove the isHidden class, we still have it small. So let's actually also apply that styling on here. So we have 70% and we have a height of 25 rem. So if I add that isHidden, let's check this out. And let's see how that will work. We still have that, but I think that may be just the way that SDK works. So the way we can go around that is basically, no, we don't need to add a color. We could just wrap this basically in a div block with a fixed height, and then just like have like a skeleton loader on there for a few seconds. So basically what we would do is we would take this div block and, oh, what happened? It just removed that whole style. Okay, interesting. Let's revert that back to the normal. And what we would do is we will just add this div block in here, and let's call this loader holder. Perfect. And we would then do like 70%, and we would do the height of 25 rem. Just like that. We would put this tiny input in here. I would give this a width of 100% and a height of 100%. I would remove those classes because they don't work anyway. And then let's have this a flex box, just like that. And perfect. Let's just make sure it stretches it to all the sides. So we need to, let's do stretch center. And we have this 25 rem, so let's also make this 25 rem. 25 rem. Okay, it still will not fully do this. Let's see. We may need to do this also as a flex box. Again, I'm not a Webflow expert, so excuse me for that. I just want to make it look good. So we will have this thing here. Let's see. Can I do like a minimum height of 90 pixels? No, it will not really give me that, so no worries. We'll have that in here, and then I want to have like my skeleton loader in here that will just give it like a very decent amount of border. And I just have my skeleton loader on here that will then load on top of this for a few seconds. So now actually, let's go to another project I made, and let's do made in Webflow, and let's steal my own skeleton loader real quick. So this SDK started out easy and it took a curve. But that's completely fine. That's what we do, and that's where I think this is why it's so exciting working on this stuff in Wized, because you never know what you end up doing, and it's always something unique that you've never done before. And I think it's a great possibility. Let's see, does this have a skeleton loader? Yeah, it has. Let's take one that maybe already has some similar styling to it. I made the slider JS, so that's in here. Let's take the one from the slider. That already was a great skeleton loader. Perfect. So now after we added the skeleton loader, we got the whole thing going on. So let's take the skeleton loader, just like that, and let's go to Webflow and let's paste that in here. Let's see, did we paste it? Yeah, we got the skeleton loader. Let's actually give this some width. Let's do like 20 rem, just so that we know that this thing exists. Okay, we got the skeleton loader, and it's not really doing loading. So let's take another project that actually will work with the skeleton loader. Okay. But why is this not loading? So we have the skeleton loader. Oh, that is just the code. We apply this probably to something different. Let's look at that. We have the loader holder. Oh, and then we apply the gotcha. So it was just the code. So we add the skeleton loader in here. So we have the skeleton loader code, and actually we can revert that back. Perfect. And now if I'm going to add the combo class of, correct me if I'm wrong, skeleton loader that the CSS will give us on here. Perfect. So we have skeleton loader on the loader holder, and I still want to maintain that 70%. So let's do height 25. For some reason it messed that up. But then I want to have that skeleton loader. So that is not working. Let's take another one I made, the one that is JavaScript based. So let's not use the CSS one for this one, because we may have some issues based on that we use a text field. But let's now use another one that is actually JavaScript based. So that was this one. We may need to change some colors, but I think it looks good. If you have like this pinkish color and then you have like the white, that looks very trendy, very modern, high tech. I like that. So let's go to the code from this project. Let's copy that. And let's add with skeleton. Perfect. So we're going to add this to the, I think it was the body. Let's double check. Yeah, it was the body. So we're going to add this to the body. And now I'm going to copy the attribute of with skeleton. And now I want to go to this loader and I want to apply the attribute of with skeleton to it. And let's do 1200 milliseconds. Maybe that's too long. Let's do 700. Let's save this. And now it's the moment of truth. Okay, maybe we got to work on the Z index, but it's doing something. So let's go a step back here. Let's actually try increasing this to 1,000, and I think it will not do big of a difference because we still have that Z index issue. Or we can hack this around actually. Let's decrease this. Let's do this 500. And let's go to Wized. Okay, perfect. We have this at 500 now. Let's see how this looks at 500. Perfect. So we even want it faster. We even want, let's do 370. And let's wait. Let's see how this looks. Wonderful. I like that. That looks great. But we still get some little something like overflow or something from here. I think that maybe that we have the corners in black. So let's put the corners to 0 and opacity none. And that didn't really do much. So let's actually add a custom HTML style attribute, style, and we do frame border 0. Or let's actually do border. I think that is border. Yeah, it's border 0. And let's see if that fixes it. And then worst case, let's prevent even more. Let's do overflow hidden on the parent element that will hold this element. Let's save this. And here you look at that. Yeah, we still got some timing imperfections, but it's getting there. So now it seems like we have something that gets even quicker loaded on top of it. It may be due to the way this is being rendered. So if we set a height of 100, and we may have some moving in here, so the way we could fix this basically would be just, let's try aligning this on the top. Then we wouldn't have much of a content issue on there because it's already loaded. But that could only be a theory as well. Let's see. Yeah, it's something with the way this SDK is loading. So we want to basically have this load even faster. So let's do 350 because it seemed to be only a small difference, and we may even need to go down to 300 to fix this. Okay, it's getting better. You can see that. So we need to do some baby steps here. Okay, let's try going down. Let's do a drastic change so we can later on move up anyway. Let's go to 300. Okay, it's published. We may even need to go more down. Let's go to 200. Let's see. Okay, that looks good. Now, the issue, or not the issue, but the issue may be that it's already up there. So let's actually position it back to the center so that it takes some time for it to expand, potentially. And that looks great. Look at that. We have our little skeleton loader. We don't have something moving like this. We have that SDK. We're loading the content dynamically in here. And now you want to customize those settings based on if the content, for example, comes from a dynamic data source that hasn't already been loaded on the page. For example, if you get, for example, the set content from a request, you want to use request finished. And then you want to do like status quote equals 200 to only show this after it has been successfully loaded. But as you can see, working with SDK sometimes is a hassle. You think it's super simple, it's well documented, and then those things happen. But if you stay on it, if you just turn this into a game, really have fun doing it. You say, it's not working, let's try it this way. And it's not working, let's make a game out of that. And first of all, two things happen. You'll have fun. Second of all, you're going to get it done. So working with SDKs is something I really enjoy doing. It's this piecing things together. It's this puzzle, figuring things out. They don't work, then you have to make them work. It's such an exciting thing for me. And I hope that I could share this excitement that I find in doing those things with you as well, and that you can find some excitement in doing those things as well. I will put the TinyMCE template in the video description down below. You can clone the Webflow project for free, the Wized project. You just go to Made in Webflow, and on Webflow, you just clone that. On Wized, you just click on Copy Project. You'll have that in your workspace. Thank you so much for watching. This was great together with you, trying to go around those obstacles, trying to figure this out. And thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for watching, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.